We've got plenty of reaction coming up in the next hour or so from political parties, and we're going to start with Pule Mabe, the ANC spokesperson, who will be sharing with us his party's reaction. Pule, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. What's the ANC's reaction to the President's address?
Well, evening and evening to the viewers. Of course, we do welcome the pronouncement made by the President of the Republic, President Cyril Ramaphosa. Most importantly is to welcome the relief measures announced, especially to support those businesses that might have suffered distress as a result of the activities that had been experienced last week. We must commend our government to have acted with the necessary speed to even ensure that they work towards the resuscitation of the 350 grants to help those that are in distress, but to also make sure that they work with many other stakeholders to resuscitate the economy and make sure that life could be able to return to normal. Going back to alert level 3 lockdown does not mean that our people must let their guard down. The fact that we have been able to increase the numbers in those that have been inoculated means that we are serious, and all of us as a country are beginning to accept the measures put by government, especially on mass vaccination. We must commend South Africans for the manner in which they've responded to this program of government to make sure that in their entirety they are ultimately vaccinated. We have already passed the 10% mark, which is quite encouraging. The number of relief measures, including tax relief for those that are in the alcohol industry over the next 3 months, is quite encouraging. Of course, we must also convey our condolences to families that have lost their loved ones who have succumbed to COVID. We have also learned personally over the past week or so that COVID does not only ravage unknown people. We have seen this also ravaging people in our own families. We have lost family members ourselves. So we do know and understand the message that is being conveyed by the President of the Republic. The appeal we must make to the rest of our people that if we do not work with our government, if we do not vaccinate, we are not going to be able to achieve the much needed herd immunity so that we can return the country back to normality. The economic reconstruction and recovery plan that has been laid out by our government is an important instrument to be able to return the economy to normality. We can only do this if we act and work together as a people.
Pule Mabe, ANC spokesperson, thank you so much for joining us. We do appreciate your time. Let's now welcome IFP spokesperson Naran Singh on the line. A very good evening to you, Mr. Singh. Thank you so much for joining us. What's IFP reaction to the President's address?
Well, good evening, Simpiwe. Good evening to your viewers. I think as the IFP, we generally welcome the wide-ranging measures that were announced by the President this evening. And it was mainly on two fronts. One is the health sector and the other is the economic sector. On the health sector and broadly speaking, I think sometimes the President has forgotten that there is an arm of government called Parliament. In the past, leaders of political parties in Parliament used to be consulted on these measures, relief measures and other measures, but that seems to be missing now, but hopefully that will happen as we move forward. As far as the vaccines are concerned, I mean, we're encouraged by the fact that more and more vaccines are becoming available. And we're also encouraged by the fact that, the President spoke about weekends. But what we would like to suggest is the private sector has to be involved in assisting government, hospitals, etc., to be able to administer these vaccines. Some of the pharmaceutical companies have offered assistance, and I think we must continually use them so we can have a 7-day-a-week vaccination program. Also speaking on the vaccines, Simpiwe, I think possibly what's going to play itself out in the next week or two is the number of people that could have been infected after the unrest of the last 2 weeks, because we saw large numbers of people, without masks, just moving around. And I think we have to be extra vigilant in terms of testing, both in KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng in particular. Coming to the economic measures, it's good. There are very laudable economic measures that have been are going to be put into place, tax incentives, other relief measures. But I think here the challenge is going to be the administrative capacity for government or government agencies to be able to process applications, whether they be for the social relief grant, whether they be for TERS or SASRIA. Because businessmen are really at wit's end with the destruction and the losses that they have suffered. And I think it's also very welcome that consideration is going to be given to those businesses that have been uninsured, because certainly they were also caught in this tide and this wave of unrest, and then they really need to be considered. And lastly, I think we need government to ensure the people of South Africa, particularly in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng, that safety and security are going to be literally at their doorsteps, to offer them the kind of safety measures that one would expect of a government, so that communities, do not have to, at great expense, stand guard protecting lives and property. And this, unfortunately, has led to certain tensions amongst communities, and this is something we can least afford in South Africa if we want to build this united nation.
Now, Mr. Singh, when you say that the president seems to have forgotten a very key the key, arm of government, which is Parliament, how do you propose that President Ramaphosa, manages the interaction between, the presidency and parliamentarians?
Well, right at the beginning, when COVID was something that we began to experience the virus in our countries, leaders of political parties in Parliament were briefed, they were consulted, they were asked for their views on some of the measures that were going to be implemented. It happened for probably 1 or 2 or 3 meetings, and after that, there was no consultation whatsoever. The president consults with business, with labor movements, with traditional leaders, etc. But we believe that as the IFP, that an extremely important component are leaders of political parties who represent the people out there.
All right, Mr. Naran Singh, great chatting to you. Thank you so much for joining us. That is IFP spokesperson Naran Singh, just sharing his party's reaction to the president's address. Now, let's cross over to the Union Buildings, wherein our political editor Mzwandile Mbeja is standing by. A very good evening to you, Mr. Mzwandile Mbeja. Thank you so much for joining us. And we understand that Mzwandile Mbeja is not ready yet for us. We've lined up quite a number of political parties to share their thoughts on what some of these measures that have been announced by President Ramaphosa mean, especially for the business sector, and which has been widely affected by the looting and the violence that we've seen in the past couple of weeks. He did mention, of course, that he will be instituting the business survival mechanism for the small businesses. And quite interesting is that many of those businesses have been caught totally unaware by the violence that has been rocking, in particular, Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. And some of these businesses did not have insurance. And those that did have insurance, you find that some of the insurance packages do not necessarily cover, violence and unrest, such as what we've seen in the last few days. So this will come as a welcome news for especially the small businesses. Let's now establish connection with our political editor. He's outside the Union Buildings, Mzwandile Mbeja. Mzwandile, a very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. What's your thoughts on the president's address earlier?
Thank you very much, Simpiwe. And of course, there will be relief, especially to those who've been receiving grants. You remember those 350 grants, so they are now to be reinstated until the end of March 2022, and I think that is great news for them because given the economic conditions plaguing the country, it's been very, very, very difficult. So I think that will be certainly welcome news in many quarters. And of course, the plans by government to rebuild the economy will be welcome news. You heard the president say they will put in about 400 million rand as part of helping towards rebuilding the companies, and him saying those companies that had insurance, so they will be able to claim, so as long as they have valid claims, and not even leaving behind those who did not have insurance. So they are working on a mechanism now to make sure that no one is left behind. I think on the whole, that would really be welcome news. But of course, the issue of the country being lowered to level 3 to allow a bit more economic activity, and that too, I think many people will welcome that. And the issue of alcohol being sold from on Monday to Thursdays, I think starting at 9, yes. So all those measures that the President has announced, Simpiwe, will be quite welcome. The industry has been complaining, has been saying they are finding it very, very difficult to make ends meet. But I think the issue that many people may still have questions about is the issue around what we've been seeing happening during the mayhem or during the riots of the past 2 weeks. They unfortunately tended to take, particularly in Durban, in Phoenix, to take some sort of a racial slant, which I think is taking our country back. I would assume that there would be people who would want to hear him say very strongly that those things would not be welcome. Yes, indeed, in his speech he did mention that we are a united country, we are a non-racial country, so our prosperity as a country depends on each other. So those issues really would think many people will still go and digest them quite thoroughly. But on the whole, I think on the economic front, some bit of welcome news, Simpiwe.
It is indeed welcome news, in particular for the small businesses. But what he didn't mention, Mzwandile, maybe if you could help us understand better, is he mentioned that small businesses will be offered some sort of a relief package, especially those businesses that have been affected by the violence and the looting. And I suppose there's millions of businesses in South Africa, and he didn't mention which category of businesses. Perhaps if you could help us understand.
I think one of the things that he said, Simpiwe, was that there would be a mechanism that will then identify just about everyone who's been affected, because in his own words, he said, no one will be left behind. And I think that statement really says a lot. It doesn't mean that because you are running a small business, so you've been affected, you are not able to do anything about it, then you are out. So he basically said they are working on it now, they are sitting down, they are working on a mechanism to make sure that no one is left behind. But as for those who are registered, who have insurances, it's even easier for them, because once they submit the valid claims, so they'll be paid out, they can be able to then rebuild. And already the work of rebuilding, the work of making sure the economic activity takes off is underway. The issue of inter-provincial travel, particularly into this province of Gauteng, also has been relaxed. You remember many people work here, and of course Gauteng is the economic hub of the country, but 35% of our GDP is produced in this province, Gauteng. So if there's a limit to who can come here for leisure, or who can come out, so it does hinder economic activity. So all those are measures really that are aimed at trying to ease the economic situation. But remember, we are still on level 3, because the issue of the pandemic, the issue of the infections is still not really down enough to be able to relax most of the restrictions. So if you look at all those things in totality, yes, there is still a long way to go at Simpiwe.
A long way to go indeed. Mzwandile Major, political editor outside the Union buildings. Thank you so much for joining us.